Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone to today's IFAM seminar series event, the Osher Center Grand Rounds. Just wanted to let you know that we will not be monitoring the chat during this session. However, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we will answer them to the best of our abilities. By the way, I'm Isra Hassan. I'm the Director of Program Development for the Osher Center. And today I'm very pleased to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Shakira Sanchez-Collins, a pastor and physician. She has demonstrated her commitment to helping individuals, families, and communities live well spiritually, physically, and mentally through her work in the pulpit, clinic, and in the community. A recipient of the Johns Hopkins Hospital Dr. Adorian Montague Community Action Award, Dr. Sanchez-Collins is also an advocate for community care, which focuses on the well-being of communities, especially marginalized communities. A gifted preacher, Dr. Sanchez-Collins was inducted in the 35th Annual Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. She has also been featured in the Chicago Tribune, WGN Chicago, and on CBS Chicago. Dr. Sanchez-Collins completed her Bachelor of Arts and Master's of Divinity degrees at Yale University, her Doctorate of Medicine degree from Duke University, and her residency in internal medicine at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Sanchez-Collins is currently a holistic primary care physician at the Osher Center for Integrative Health here at Northwestern Medicine, and also is the assistant pastor of the St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church in Chicago. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on this afternoon. I'm so excited to talk about this subject at the intersection of spirituality and health and well-being. The title of my talk for today is called "There is a Balm in Gilead: Healing Theologies and Spiritual Practices in Black Spiritual Spaces." So we have a few different objectives for today. The first objective is to examine the role of spiritual spaces for culturally competent health education and advocacy and promotion. The second role or objective is examining the role of spiritual practice in creating opportunities for social connection and belonging. And then the third objective will be to explore how spiritual practices and theologies can be utilized for coping with stress and also with challenges. So first, want to set up the basis of my talk in terms of defining religion as spirituality. There's always going to be an overlap between religion and spirituality, but this is just kind of my way of kind of helping break up the difference. When we are discussing religion, typically it's thought to be ritual practices, a system of beliefs. It can be an abstract or sometimes concrete system of ideas, depending on the different types of religion. And then often it's characterized by doctrine, traditions that help elucidate the human experience. Now, spirituality, which can definitely overlap with religion, doesn't have to be linked to a particular spirituality or a particular religion or a particular community. Spirituality can also be a very personal, individual experience. And it can also be its own set of beliefs and practices and rituals. And that's where religion and spirituality can definitely overlap. And then it can also be made up of how we interact with the world, with ourselves, and what does our actions look like. So when we think about the relationship between spirituality and health, there's been some thoughts and research when we think about the individual level. There could be both positive, but there can be also negative effects of spirituality and religion on health. So the positive would be, there are times where there can be decreased levels of depression and anxiety. There can be this can be a way to help people cope with problems that may be in their control or outside of their control. But on the flip side, there are times where it can create more stress in health. People can, of course, see health events as forms of punishment and other things that could be in the negative category of spirituality and health. And then when we talk about the relationship between spirituality and health, there's also the community level. And this isn't just the only, relationship at the community level. We're going to go more in depth, but this is just a little bit of idea of how, as a social network, um, as a spiritual or religious community, it can be helpful for certain healthy behaviors. It can maybe keep people on certain track based off of those beliefs. It can also encourage unhealthy behaviors, whether it's around food or other practices. So there's definitely a large spectrum between how religion and spirituality can influence health itself. So I want to first focus on the first objective on how can healing and spiritualities, particularly I want to speak from my context. Obviously, the categories of religion and spirituality are gigantic. And so to keep from speaking about every single aspect of that, I wanted to focus today on Black spiritual spaces because that is where my expertise lies, and more specifically, Black churches and Black churches in the United States of America. So when we talk about the first objective around the role of spirituality and religion in health promotion and health advocacy, we can go back to the roots and the history of this relationship. And so I bring this up here to show you this old document from the 1790s. If we all remember with history of medicine, there was the great yellow fever epidemic. And at one time, one of the main hubs of that epidemic was in Philadelphia. And so Dr. Benjamin Rush, a very well-known doctor in history, he approached Bishop Richard Allen and Reverend Absalom Jones, who at the time were clergy. They were free Black people in the 1790s in Philadelphia. And at that time, Philadelphia had a large free Black population. And so Bishop Richard Allen wound up becoming the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is still in existence today. And I'm a minister in that denomination. But it was the first Black denomination in the United States. And then Absalom Jones goes to become one of the first Black Episcopal priests in the Episcopal Church. So Dr. Benjamin Rush approached both of them, and at the time there was this false belief that Black people were immune to the yellow fever, which is part of the reason why he approached them. But they felt that it was their duty to help, so they served as nurses. They served as those who dug the graves for those who had passed away from the yellow fever epidemic. So in the beginning, the first Black denomination was a space that was helping supplement and providing a form of health care and health assistance to the community. And as a side note, part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church came out of the Free African Society, which was a society where when people came from the South and people left plantations either through escaping or somehow being freed, they would need help to start their lives, their well-being, food, shelter, healthcare, and that was part of the work that Bishop Allen and Reverend Jones did. So now when we think about the contemporary in the present, it continues with a health commission and the AME Church, where they focus on issues such as HIV and dementia, partnerships with the Alzheimer's Association, I'm not sure, blanking on that word, Alzheimer's Association, the American Heart Association. They partner with those organizations to make sure that information about different conditions are given to churches, and that churches are able to participate in promoting further information on that topic. It's also a vehicle, the Health Commission, to promote the foundation of having health ministries. Health ministries have been a place that have been able to do health screenings, advocacy around, prostate cancer, breast cancer, things like that, to bring awareness. And so that is a present day use of the Black spiritual space to promote health, provide health care, and be a conduit to help increase access to health care. This is just a picture of the health magazine that the denomination has. And on the denomination is one of the many bishops of the AME Church. So speaking of spiritual spaces, just the foundation of that is the use of faith-based organizations and health programming. So there was a systematic review that was done several years ago where they were wondering, like, are faith-based health programs effective? Like, is there actually something that is measurable and tangible for this to be something continuing to go forth? And so faith-based organizations became a way, especially in the 90s, early 2000s, in ways of trying to figure out how to increase access to address high-risk populations. And so the systematic review was to look at, was their effectiveness? And so I want to just give a segue. There is faith-based and there's faith-place. And the biggest difference between the two is that faith-place is mainly that faith community is more of a location, and that all of that programming and all of the interventions are created by another organization or institution. Faith-based is when you have involved that faith community in the creation of the intervention, which also promotes cultural competent health promotions. So they were looking at both with the study, looked at a big chunk, 41% were African American, 60% were congregations, and it was about it was a mix of faith-based and faith-placed. And so when they looked at the studies, they found that when you do have faith-based organizations, faith-based interventions or faith-placed interventions, they saw changes in weight, changes in cholesterol, fruit, vegetable consumption, usage of cancer screenings that were available, and increased knowledge about particular health conditions. And so one example of this program was called Sister Talk. I became aware of this program when I was in divinity school at Yale. It was done through University of Connecticut, and they partnered with churches in Hartford. And it was a faith-based weight loss program to help address obesity in African American and Black women in the Hartford area. And these are some of the lessons that were part of that original curriculum, and other curriculums where they focused on social support, addressing challenges. Um, and what was interesting is having seen the curriculum, each lesson had a miniature spiritual message or sermon to contextualize the health lesson into something that was spiritual. And so what happened is the churches that were involved, they were able to help contribute to that spiritual part, while the local public schools of public health and other persons, because Brown University was involved also, contributed to the actual health education part. But it was a classic example of how you were able to utilize spiritual messaging and themes with the evidence-based lessons surrounding health. And what we found was, this was just some of the uh, participant criteria. You had a BMI over 25, and it was through Brown University, West Connecticut, and St. Francis Hospital. But what we found were that participants were 2.6 times more likely to lose weight than those members who had not participated in the program, and that 55% of the participants did lose weight. And then when they did almost a year out, they saw that over half, 2/3 of the women were able to maintain their weight. So that was the first iteration of the Sister Talk program. And then the second grouping was done in New York City. And so there, by this time, I was in medical school and I was the liaison with the churches. So they were able to take Methodists, AME, different denominations. And again, the churches contributed to the spiritual lessons in the curriculum, in addition to adding the health pieces. And in that short time, they did see weight loss. And one of the women in the program, her famous quote is that it's not what we lost, but what we gained. And so this was a classic example of how utilizing the space of the space, but also the teachings and spiritual practices of those local Black churches in both Hartford and in New York, were able to provide a unique example and opportunity to focus on health behavior modification. So moving to the second point. So the first part we talked about was health advocacy, promotion, and awareness through Black spiritual spaces. The second concept that we're addressing is the social connection and belonging. We know definitely with this pandemic, a lot of attention has focused more. This is the more on social connection and loneliness. So this is a graph from the Surgeon General's report around social connection, that in terms of the rise of loneliness in the United States. And you can see when you go from 2003 to 2020, how the amount of time of social isolation has increased, how companionship and social engagement has decreased. And so I bring this up as the backdrop of addressing social connection and belonging. And I think it's interesting because, in this time, there are more people who are what they call unaffiliated, whether or not part of a faith community or a church, synagogue, or a mosque. And so there are thoughts around like, what, for those who aren't part of the community, has there been a great replacement? Is there another replacement that has been able to meet the same needs? And the verdict is still out there. And so just kind of putting that in the backdrop. So in the Surgeon General's report, he does focus on the utility of religious and faith groups, how they can be a source of regular social contact, serve as a community of support, can create a sense of belonging around shared values and beliefs, perhaps can provide meaning and purpose, and may be associated with reduced risk-taking behaviors. And so when we talk about supportive longitudinal relationships, that is not the only place to get them from, but Black spiritual spaces are an option for people to have supportive longitudinal relationships. We know that, especially when we think about older generations, those who are over 60 are more likely to live alone in the US and Europe when you compare them to the other regions of the world. And at the same time, older adults are more likely to regularly attend their religious spaces more than younger adults for different reasons. Older generations are more likely to go to church, and also older generations are more likely to have time to be physically in this space compared to the younger generations. And so, looking at Dr. Koenig, who's a psychiatrist, at one point was at Duke, I'm not sure if he's still there, well, in his research around faith and mental health, talked about how the church attendance itself increases the number of non-family relationships that people have, the number of telephone calls and support that people are receiving. And so often the support that people are receiving is another level of social interaction. There was this news article that was talking about, it came out a couple months ago, that was talking about the significance of having a third place that's not work and not your house. And so for some people, this becomes that third place where people know you. People uh, pick up on the fact that you have not been around. They haven't seen you for a while. And I give you a classic case. As a assistant pastor, we receive messages throughout the service sometimes from our ushers. And one Sunday, one of our members sent up a message to the pulpit and said, "We haven't heard from brother so and so. Should we go check on him?" And we're like, "Yes, please." And come to find out, he was found down and needed to go to the hospital. So for those who might not have a lot of family around and things like that, it's another, like, I see you, and when I don't see you, I'm concerned, which is important in people's well-being. So some of the ways that those relationships are built happen through small groups and small ministries. Often people don't get to know everybody, but there are usually women's groups, men's groups. There are older youth groups, and so people are able to build relationships with a smaller subgroup in that spiritual space. Another practice that helps is the practice of what they call sick and shut in visitation, or what we call it. It might be called something different in other places, where those who are in the hospital or have reached the age where it's just hard to get out of the house, that they're getting visited at least monthly by someone, whether it's clergy or a member of the faith community, to see how they're doing, to make sure that they are still part of and feel like they're part of something, despite not being able to physically ever come in the building. Um, Fellowship. One thing that is really important to me is not so much at the beginning of the service, but at the end of service, people, as they're leaving the worship service, um, making sure to greet them, whether it's with a handshake or a hug. And especially when I think about some of our older members, where it's like this might be all they see the entire week. And so being able to look someone in the eye, shake their hand, um, letting them know that they are part of something and that we care, we're happy to see you, I believe is part of that social connection and belonging. We do, you know, recognizing birthdays, anniversaries, all those things. It's basically another form of a family, that's being able to check on you, and make sure that you feel like your life is important to other people, which I think can sometimes be hard for people to have, especially when they're isolated, in life. So, in addition to, so we talked about health advocacy and promotion. That was the first objective. The second objective, we talked about the work of helping build social connection and have a sense of belonging. And then the third, is really looking at how to cope with stress. What are spiritual practices and theologies that help people deal with daily challenges, and daily issues that can lead to stress, depression, and anxiety. So I bring us back to the theme that I put at the beginning of this presentation. There is a balm in Gilead. So now I actually want to explain what that means. And so on the left, are lyrics to There is a Balm in Gilead. And so this is a Negro spiritual that was created, composed during American slavery in the 19th century. And so the words is there is a balm. So when we think about a balm in Gilead, a balm was a medicinal perfume that was believed to have healing properties. And so this song was often sung by those who were looking for healing. And interesting enough, the words of the song, there is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin sick soul, um, or let the Holy Spirit revive my soul again. While the language really specifically talks about spiritual healing, this was also something that was also used to refer to physical and other types of healing. And so it becomes such an important spiritual, that is used, that there was a modern day reinvention of the song, by Richard Smallwood. But before then, Nina Simone, who was a major singer, Mahalia Jackson, they all recorded There is a Balm in Gilead. But the more recent one is by Richard Smallwood, where he redoes some of the words. But it also just shows you that even now, hundreds of years later, that importance of that concept is a balm in Gilead. When people pray and they're talking about physical healing, when they're talking about those who are in the hospital or going through different health issues, often that term balm in Gilead is used, to refer to physical healing also. And so when you think, going back to the original lyrics, there is a balm. It's a very definitive statement. They're not asking, is there a balm? They're saying there is. And so despite what's going on, there's this determination and hope that there can be healing that takes place. Unclear what type of healing may look like or what it will happen, but there's still this hope. And so, we think about theology, healing theologies in Black spiritual spaces. That theology starts with Negro spirituals. Here's another spiritual called Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel? And it's a story about a character in the Christian Bible where Daniel was put in a lion's den and somehow came out unharmed. And so the spiritual was like, didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Then why not every man? And so the spiritual then also captures that hope that, okay, if you've done it before, then it can be done again. And so this theology of hope, which you, for African Americans, you first see in the Negro spirituals, in addition to the other purposes that they served, is something that continues to influence how Black spiritual spaces deal with difficulty, deal with sickness, deal with pain, deal with illness. And so once we get to the 1960s, that theology becomes more formalized. Like I said, it started way back during American slavery, but during the 1960s, during the civil rights movement, you have Dr. James Cone, who was a professor, who happens also was a AME, African Methodist Episcopal minister also, but was also a professor forever at Union Theological Seminary, which is the divinity school affiliated with Columbia University in New York. And so he creates and formalizes what they call Black liberation theology. And so it's an understanding that that he says Black theology is an understanding of the gospel, which sees justice for the poor as the very heart of what the Christian gospel is about and the very heart of what God is doing in the world. To summarize that, basically that God cares about the oppressed. God cares about those who are going through things. And so and when we talk about this, we're not talking about just health challenges, but just talking about all the challenges, particularly that Black people were facing in the 1960s and into the present. Black liberation theology is a theology, not the only theology, but is a theology that can be found in many Black churches today, that is heard through the sermons and messages that are given by clergy. But the basis of it is that regardless of what the present might look like, that there is hope that something could get better. And so by having that hope itself, that itself is helping to cope with stress. And so when we think about the theology of hope, it's not like a superficial optimism, but a hope that either perspective can change if circumstances can't, or that maybe the situation could eventually get better. And so there is another quote is that faith is the absolute down to your core belief that despite all the pain, disappointment, and hurt, that there's still some type of promise in the future. So that is the basis of when we think about the hope around healing, the hope around dealing with pain, that there is, that it might look really bad, but maybe something will get better. And so often you'll run into, when we talk to members who are going through different life challenges and life issues, sometimes that's all they have. And it might not necessarily be like they're expecting to be cured of cancer. It's more so like they're going to focus on what is going well. And then that helps them get through those interesting times in their life. So when we talk about the theology hope, that is one part of the theology. And then the second healing theology is going to be about focusing on community versus individualism. As we know, American society is very individualistic. And so one of the practices around healing theologies in Black spiritual spaces is bringing the community into conversation. I love this quote that says, "We cannot heal in isolation. We need others." Or this one, where healing is not just curing one physical condition or of a set of symptoms, but it involves correcting, balancing the energies of the self and community, the energies among community members, including the deceased or unborn, and the energies between human and divine by whatever name this divine being is known. So both of these are different perspectives, different views on how an individual's well-being is still connected to the rest of their community. And it makes sense that this would be a Black healing theology, just because people of African descent um, historically have focused on and lived with multiple generations. There's a really great importance put on ancestors and things like that. And so this part of this theology is the a mix of Christianity, a mix of the African descent history that creates that theology that this is not all me by myself. So one of those practices that uh, emphasizes this is the use of corporate prayer. And so corporate prayer is used whether it's in person or whether it's in a Zoom call. The ways that it happens the most for us is that during the worship experience, one person prays for the whole body. Or let's say there's a virtual Bible study. At the end, the pastor will ask, are there concerns? Are there prayer concerns? And people will say, I need prayer for this, or here's something that went really well. So it's a prayer of gratitude. And so that whole body is praying on that together. And I love how Episcopal priest, Reverend Margaret Gunther, says that intercession, which is prayer, holds the sufferer in the embrace of the community, which means that the sufferer is not alone. And even if the circumstances do not change, they still feel surrounded by that support, that they're not the only one that is carrying the weight of that challenge. Or with Dr. Golden in Healing in African American Life, Faith, Health, and Healing in African American Life, prayer is not just a personal spiritual practice, but a communal conversation that reflects the history of African Americans. And so that gives the backdrop for the lyrics at the bottom, where it's a gospel song that is used a lot, is very well known, regardless of what denomination of Black church, whether it's Methodist, Baptist, whatever. It's a really popular song. And they say, somebody prayed for me, had me on their mind. They took the time and prayed for me. I'm so glad they prayed. I'm so glad they prayed for me. And it's one of the songs that just captures how just the fact that someone else was thinking about you, someone else prayed for you itself can help lift a little bit of weight, at least, for those who undergo any challenge in life. So that concludes my talk for today. There is a Balm in Gilead, and I want to open up for any questions, comments on this presentation, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. right now, I do not see any, but thank you so much, Dr. Oh, hold on one second. We got one comment. This was wonderful. We'll give it a couple more minutes just to make sure that there's no more questions. Well, thank you to everyone, and thank you again for the presentation.